Am I supposed to be using this thing for an informal lunch session or not?
For an informal, no.
Okay. I was trying to be cooperative.
They might be recording it, but I don't think so.
Okay. Why do we need This is the informal lunch session on the Global Alliance for Justice Education and the Justice Education Initiative. I'm Clark Cunningham. I teach at Georgia State in Atlanta, and I'm also a member of the steering committee of the Global Alliance for Justice Education. This is it's just www.gaje.org is the website, Global Alliance for Justice Education, pronounced like a tire gauge. And as it says, it's a global alliance of persons committed to achieving justice through education. Clinical education of law students is a key component of justice education, but this organization also works to advance other forms of socially relevant legal education, which includes education of practicing lawyers, judges, non-government organizations, and the lay public. Delegates from every continent in over 50 countries have participated in GAJE's first 4 worldwide conferences. Membership, and if you click on free membership is free. All you have to do is send an email, and it's open to anyone who is involved and interested in promoting justice education. It's not limited to law professors. It's not limited to lawyers. We have members who are social activists, members who are law students. In fact, the new general secretary of GAJE started out as a law student. First newsletter editor started out coming to conferences as a law student. And we like to actually expand our involvement of law students. We've had 4 worldwide conferences so far. The first one was in 1999 in India. Let's see. I've got a couple of pictures here. Well, anyway. It was quite an event. It was held in Thiruvananthapuram, which is in the southern state of Kerala. This was the traditional Indian inauguration event. The organizer of the local host committee was Dr. Madhava Menon, who is the founder of the National Law School of India and widely recognized as probably the leading legal educator in India. And he was very much an inspiring founding figure for the Global Alliance for Justice Education. He actually gave a keynote speech at the 1996 AALS Clinic Conference in Miami that had an international component, and his address was in defense of socially relevant legal education. And it was really that speech got people at that conference to get together and talk about the idea. Maybe there was a critical mass of people around the world interested in Menon's vision of legal education that was about achieving justice. And then there was a planning meeting in Australia later that year, and the group was launched the following year. One of the basic principles of GAJE is to hold the conferences, to make them as affordable as possible, and to always hold them in areas of the world that are accessible to the developing world. So we don't have our worldwide conferences in London or New York or anything like that. Registration. Typically, early registration is about $350, might be $400 this year. Includes most of your meals. There's the cost of getting there. Typically, accommodations start at like $40 a night, and there are really virtually no other expenses involved. And the registration fees, which are paid by people from the United States, Australia, Europe, and so on, tend to then be used to subsidize people from the developing world. So registrations fees are typically reduced or waived for people from the developing world, and we try as much as possible to provide travel grants. From the very first conference in 1999, I think consistently majority of the people have been women, and a majority of the people have not been from Europe, the United States, and Australia, but have been from South Asia, Africa, former Soviet Union, China, that sort of thing. Get a little flavor. This is the group picture from the first conference. Get some sense of the variety of folks there. The next conference in 2001 was in South Africa. The next one was in Poland. Then the most recent one was in Argentina. Let's see, that's the motley crew who were at the Argentina conference. If you look closer, you'll probably see some people that you know. The 5th conference is going to be in the Philippines in December. A lot of helpful kinds of international collaboration have come out of GAJE. For example, those of you who, well, you heard some passing reference in Paul Mahar's keynote address to the Standardized Client Project. We talked a little bit more about it in the session that some of you were in just now about Simple. That project would not have happened but for GAJE. What happened was that because of the kind of informal network of information that GAJE provided, Georgia State hosted a conference on alternatives to the bar examination 5 years ago, and Paul and a number of other GAJE people were invited from other countries to talk about how they do the bar exam. While Paul was there, he met Larry Grossberg from New York Law School, who's been working on standardized clients, and Larry and I and a couple of other people went out to see how the medical profession does it at the Atlanta Skills Assessment Center. Paul called his dean and said, hey, we got to look at this. Went back, we ended up with a partnership between Georgia State and the Glasgow Graduate School of Law to do a pilot project over there. The success of that pilot project is now being brought back to the United States, and John Garvey at Pierce Law School is now, Pierce has hired Paul and Karen to come over and show them how to do it. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that the GAJE is all about, is collaboration of ideas among countries. So, just this past spring, the steering committee adopted what's called the Justice Education Initiative. It's a new link on our homepage. By the way, this is a very primitive website. If you've spent any time wandering through it, you'll see that it's an amateurish job, and I can say that because I'm the webmaster. So, and I know almost nothing about website design. The Justice Education Initiative is a result of our membership, which is about 500-600 strong now. Pretty consistently at the annual meetings, and certainly the one in Argentina, said GAJE has been doing a great job of providing a kind of informal exchange of information and networking the way conferences do. But we really want GAJE to be more actively involved in actually promoting change and supporting efforts around the world to change legal education. And it seems like a critical time. I mean, with the Carnegie Report and the Best Practices Report and other kinds of things going on with the ABA, we know that there's much more openness to changing legal education here in the United States than in the years I've been teaching. There's a lot going on in the United Kingdom and Australia, and there has been a tremendous amount of interest in new methods of education, particularly in countries that have a relatively new kind of opportunity to have democratic governance and rule of law. So whether it's the countries of Latin America that are emerging from one party or authoritarian rule, whether it's South Africa, whether it's former Soviet Union, lots of these countries realize that they've got to start from scratch. And they're very clear that legal education can't be just about continuing the same system that they had been living under, because that's not a system anybody wants. And so they see legal education as a way of transforming the society in which they live. So the Justice Education Initiative is a 10-year project to try to support the efforts of people around the world who are trying to transform the process by which people become lawyers, which is not always law schools. And probably the primary tool for doing that is going to be the development of a kind of website within the GAJE website called the Justice Education Initiative website that will, and I'll kind of go down through the plan here. At the conference in the Philippines in December, the first thing we're going to do is we'll have a broadly representative group of people to kind of think about sort of what might an ideal program of justice education look like. Obviously, every country is different. Within countries, there are different needs. But are there some general kinds of things that we could encourage jurisdictions to build into the process of becoming a lawyer? The Carnegie Report talks about building in development of professional identity and professional responsibility throughout the process of becoming a lawyer. Many of us would think that some kind of experiential learning where you actually have some interaction, particularly with people in need who are affected by the legal system, should happen while you're becoming a lawyer, and so on. So work out a kind of definition, collect examples of innovations, and then what we want to have by December are some sample web-based materials. Because the problem for GAJE, for many people, is, okay, we have a conference, people do PowerPoint presentations, we have a booklet, we try to put a few things on the conference report, but they don't seem to really turn into something useful. And there are all kinds of sort of things scattered around now about innovative legal education. But for example, I got a request from someone on my faculty, having just held this, can share this Future of Legal Education conferences, just give you a real quick list of the law schools in the United States that are already trying to do something to implement the Carnegie Report, and who I should talk to about that. And I thought, that would take me like 4 hours to put together, and I have no idea that it would be complete. Okay, well, the idea is have a website where you just go click and say, okay, here's a list of schools that are doing stuff, here's the contact people. If you want to go click, find, look at their curriculum, their clinic, whatever, be one-stop shopping. Now, maybe something like that's already out there, but I don't think so. There are bits and pieces of it. The AALS Curriculum Committee has a website. There's a blog for legal innovation. But, of course, those are all, as far as I know, American-specific. This would be a totally global site. So, we would certainly hope to encourage anybody here to think about going to the conference. Here's the conference homepage. A couple of pictures of the Philippines to get you interested. And there's the preliminary conference schedule is up. The call for proposals is going to be up probably in a week, along with the travel grant application material. If you are a tenured professor at Harvard Law School, please don't apply for a travel grant. You can download the flyer and pass it out. In fact, I'll pass out the flyers here. And you can download it. The conference is on one side, and a one-page summary of the Justice Education Initiative is on the back side. But when I talked to John Mayer about it, it seemed to us that CALI was a perfect place to come to see if there are potential teams of people who would like to be involved in putting together these demonstration web pages. We know what one set of pages is going to look like, or we have the beginning of an idea of it. It looks like the folks at GGSL are going to be working as consultants to GAJE to put together these materials. There's a small grant that we have. So almost certainly one set of web pages is going to be about client interviewing and counseling. And so you would go there and if you want to find out about standardized clients, there would be, you'd go in this direction. If you want to find out about, I would like to think that the stuff that Larry Farmer and CALI's been working on with multimedia, so that you'd be able to find out about that. There may be a place right now to go. I'm not exactly sure where it is. And that's the point, I guess. So all that stuff may be sitting on the GAJE website, or it may be some sections that just sends you over here. But that you would try to collect as much as possible stuff in that one place, particularly things that would be very hands-on. So, for example, when John Garvey and I were working 2 days ago on training standardized clients, one of the things we wanted to have would be two short videos of a good first meeting with a client and a bad first meeting with a client. Well, it's not that easy to do the bad meeting. And we were inventing it from scratch. Now, it might be very useful to have a whole bunch of little webcasts that anybody could download, whether it's to train people playing a client role, or to show to an interviewing class, or even to use in a first-year class. Something as simple as that. But also to download, instructions for how to do this, sample materials, that sort of thing. And the thought is, when we get to Manila, is that we would have a number of workshops, and in any given workshop, there would be a mix of people who probably are already involved in teaching trial practice or negotiation or legal literacy or client counseling, whatever the materials are. And there will be some people who are from a law school that right now does nothing but lectures. which would be probably the most common thing around the world. But there are 50 law schools in China that are moving toward a clinical model of education. It's pretty amazing. And so they say, we'd like to take the first step. So we'd like to figure out if we're going to do a simulation course, how would we get started? And so they're in the room. And so in a way, they're primarily the intended audience for the website. The people who've been doing it for a while say, this is good, but had you thought about putting this in? Had you thought about putting this in? What about that? And so that by the time we're done in Manila, we've gotten a pretty good idea of both getting expert input for these subject matters, and we also sort of had a test with an audience of potential users. And then by July, by a year from now, by the following July, the website would be up and running. And that hopefully it, along with this sort of normative statement of what a good legal education should look like, could start to influence what's happening in jurisdictions around the world. So certainly just questions about all of this. I'd love to have, if people are thinking about, gee, I'd love to be involved in this. You don't have to go to the Philippines, by the way. You can work on the web pages and not go to the Philippines. And then also, I'm sure we're reinventing a bunch of wheels. So if people want to say, oh, well, that's great, but didn't you know that so-and-so already has done something very much like it, and this is where the website is. So open it up. Yeah?
There's an organization called the Public Interest Law Initiative. I don't know if you've
Right.
heard of them. Yeah, and they've been working mostly in Eastern Europe.
Right.
Now they're one of the local, I know. They're working on similar kinds of things. And we've actually been on the faculty of one.
Right. And in fact, I mean, we have a pitiful resources page. And I don't even know if this takes you to the right site anymore.
Yeah. Well, may or may not.
Right, but it used to.
Right.
Right.
There you
And they have one of the most sophisticated sites of the sort.
go. Right.
But it's focused on Russia and Eastern Europe. So, it's a good model. Yeah.
How many languages is this going to be in?
We'll start in English, obviously. Well, maybe not obviously. We intend to be bilingual in Spanish as soon as possible. The newsletter now is bilingual in Spanish. We do a newsletter every two months, and it's now in Spanish. We hope to have at least large sections of the website in Spanish. Where that goes from there, my guess is, just from my interactions, is that probably stuff that's in Chinese, the Chinese are going to want to post it on their servers, not on our server. But there may be some interaction with that. Then we'll take a look at other languages. Russian would probably be the next one among the groups that we interact with. And the conference in Argentina was totally bilingual. That is, everybody had little headphones, so sometimes the sessions were in Spanish and I was getting it translated into English, and I'd get up and make a comment in English, and then they'd have to wait until it got translated. We probably will have simultaneous translation for Chinese because Manila is so close, relatively close to mainland China, and we may also have simultaneous translation for Spanish again. Yeah.
For member organizations, perhaps you want to have a forum where members can modify their own and database entries so that you won't have to be the one who does all of that. Keep it current.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that we need to figure out, and anybody who would like to volunteer to join the communication committee, we'd love that, is the way to do it. At the moment, this website, sad, simple thing that it is, although it has www.gaje.org, that actually directs you to someplace at the GSU server. And because, guess what, it's the GSU server, if you're not an employee of Georgia State, you can't edit this site, which means that, unfortunately, I am the bottleneck for the website. So one of the first things that we're looking at is there are a number of options to try to change the website to create much broader access. And I just don't have the technical expertise. There's a software called Contentor that might allow us to stay on the GSU website but give people access. There's been some discussion of using free Google pages, but I understand that can be problematic, and Google apparently will impose a copyright. We may just buy space, you know, but you know, we need technical assistance for that. But no, we'd actually like to create the GAJE website with different levels of access, so that an individual could access their own membership. That if your clinic or law school or NGO has a page about what you do, you can create and edit that directly. And then the different committees, so the newsletter committee can edit the newsletter page, but it can't mess with the conference page, because it is, you all know better than I do, if you have lots of people who can edit the same page, you can end up with a terrible mess. I screw myself up editing, and I'm the only editor.
Where does the funding for this Justice Education Initiative come from? I'm sorry.
GAJE.
It comes from
Oh,
GAJE.
oh, well, the
Thanks.
Justice Education Initiative, well, CALI is generously co-sponsoring the conference and the initiative with a little bit of money. GAJE itself has operated in all its years with no regular funding and no staff and no physical location in the world. And that's been a political decision as much as anything. Part of the idea for GAJE was that we thought it was very important to have an organization that was both actually not dominated by any group of people or area of the world, but also transparently was not. So the steering committee rules are, the steering committee is elected at the annual meeting. Each region of the world gets 2 representatives. They have to be 1 man and 1 woman. So there's only 1 man from North America on the steering committee, and that's me. That's all that there can be. We have a couple of at-large memberships. And until recently, we didn't have any staff. We finally decided to have a part-time general secretary. And we basically run the conferences off the registration fees, and occasionally the Ford Foundation, PEALI, Open Society Institute, the ABA CALI have indirectly supported us by providing the registration fees and the grants for people to come from Kenya and China and so on. And so we usually have a little bit, unlike I guess CALI, we usually have a little bit of money left over after each conference, and that gives us what to work with. We are actually, part of the idea of having the Justice Education Initiative is to have something to present to potential funders, which we think is different than saying, here's our organization, which, by the way, anybody can join and nobody has to pay dues for. Give us the money so we can go to conferences. That doesn't make for a great fundraising appeal. Yeah.
There are websites that try to hook nonprofits up with volunteers.
Uh-huh.
And there's also, you may consider getting interns, and you might be able to help with the website, because it sounds.
So you go, if you want to be a volunteer, you go to the website and it sort of does the
And also
magic.
nonprofits can go there and get matched
Okay.
with volunteers.
But actually would be helpful. Your name is
Jenny.
Jenny
Smith.
from,
Here.
oh, okay.
No.
Yeah, if you could just, email me or something, sometime.
I'd be glad to.
Those are great ideas. Other questions?
Where's our wiki?
I will put on the wiki. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
What kind
And
of,
just for everybody's benefit,
sure, I'm sorry?
your name and
I'm
where.
Steve Chanenson from Villanova Law School.
Okay.
Most of what I heard was about the Justice Education Initiative was kind of law school based, as I got it, for law students. The description also talks about working with just regular practitioners or judges. Has that taken shape in some way in what we anticipate, or you anticipate it will be?
The organization, as I say, is, the mission statement says we're not talking about just clinical education, we're not just talking about law students. So there are certainly lots of GAJE members who are involved in legal literacy, that are NGOs that will go out and provide information to people. Projects like the CALI project that you were telling me about, where pro se litigants and that sort of thing, are involved in legal education of people who are already lawyers or are already judges. all of those things are happening around the world, and in many law schools they're much more combined than I think a typical American law school. So the National Law School of India, that's kind of a model in many ways in my mind for justice education. They consult for the government of India on new legislation against domestic violence. They do judicial training. They do lawyer training. They do teacher training. They train undergraduates. They go out and run camps in the villages for people to learn about their rights. They go to undergraduate institutions and do legal literacy. So and students are involved in that. So it's kind of a mix together. We expect that this conference in the Philippines is going to have a very strong community education component. There's this group called the Alternative Law Groups, which I don't know a lot about. Should take us to their website. But it seems to be a very well-developed organization, NGOs, and it's not, these are not law schools at all. They're going to be, whenever we go to a region, we obviously spend a fair amount of time learning about and trying to support what's going on in that region. So I think there's going to be quite a bit about, and for those of us, I would say any given conference, a majority of people there are law teachers. But how can law teachers interact more with, learn more from, and support NGOs in their community? So that's certainly going to be the theme of the Manila Conference. Existing websites about innovative kinds of legal education that are already out there that we should look at it for models or link to, other than CALI? No? I mean, Clinical Legal Education Association has an annotated bibliography. One of the things, it seems small, but I was in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, and they wanted some articles about clinical education. And it was kind of distressing for me to realize that the Clinical Law Review not only doesn't have any articles online, but doesn't even have a complete index online. And the International Journal of Clinical Legal Education, which is based in England, doesn't even really have a website much. There's a website up for the conference that's happening in Ireland next month. But these folks for these, and I did send them the annotated bibliography through 2005, but a lot of this sort of assumes everybody has Lexis and Westlaw, right? So what modest things we might do is just start trying to provide shorter bibliographies and get permissions from people. I, for example, those of you that are in clinical education, I knew that there had been guidelines for in-house clinics that had been put together by a committee of the clinic section and published in the Journal of Legal Education a long time ago. So I did a PDF and sent them to them. But that's the kind of thing that happens now, is that we do it all in a very ad hoc way. And we'd like to try to pull that all together. Use of simulations, anything? People know of websites that will give you advice about how to do that? No? Well, it sounds like there's a need. Yeah, Chris? Oh, go ahead and tell people who you are.
I'm Chris. I work at the same institution.
Georgia State. Proceed.
Georgia State. OpenCroquet.org has
Open croquet?
it's like a 3D simulation. It's open source. There's a lot of interesting uses there for modeling, statistical modeling, and research. And so you might find that interesting.
What?
Or
It's like an open source version of Second One.
Did I get it right?
I think so.
So it's simulations in the sense of moving avatars around, not simulations
Well,
that we
they're
saw
finding-
this morning. Yeah.
Well, they're also doing other simulations too, where they're taking that data, taking real-time data from like industrial equipment and turning it into a great collaborative way to analyze the data, so different researchers can go in and manipulate and play with all the information that they're gathering. So.
Huh.
There's maybe the SALT website, Society of American Law Teachers. And if I get it done, there'll be a developing bibliography on assessment, outcomes assessment.
Oh, wrong one. So what's the website? What's the SALT website?
I put in Society of American Law Teachers.
That'll work. I was just being lazy.
Law.
Talk more.
I should have just put it in there. In a second, I'll go to the what the AALS curriculum committee has put together, or starting to put together. You've looked at.
It is pretty stupid.
Yeah. Okay. Conferences, events, projects, retreats, position statements, networking, resources. Would that be the place to look?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, work in progress. It appears. Salary survey, library, and links. Okay. If you put in, I think it's AALS curriculum.
If you just go to ALS and then go to,
Okay, so there's a website of curricular innovation.
Is this the Rubin?
Yeah, this is what Ed Rubin is working on. And Innovations has this stuff here. One other thing couple of things you could look at. There was reference to the Future of Legal Education Conference. This was hosted by Georgia State and co-sponsored by GAJE, by the National Institute for Teaching Ethics and Professionalism, Consortium of Professionalism Initiatives, Council of Australian Law Deans, ABA. And if you look at the program for each speaker, there's typically a bio, usually a full paper, and the abstract. We're just now beginning to put up the PowerPoints, and then we'll have a webcast of everything. Well, it's not worth doing right now, but you could take a look at that. Earl Daniels is sitting next to Chris Eaton. We have Earl and Chris to thank for the fact that this thing looks so much better than the GAJE website, because it was mostly his artistry rather than mine. And there are a couple of ways you can go at their abstracts. And we had people from Australia, South Africa, Scotland, India, England, presenting, as well as a number of Americans.
It was 10 countries.
Right. There we go. Those are all the participants. But again, it's all sort of scattered around. So let's see. Anything else people can think of? I've also, suggestions about if we, Jeff.
I just had a question.
Sure.
Something that was on my mind when I saw this. I just heard of this organization here today, so
Right.
excuse my ignorance. But
Excuse our lack of outreach.
No, that's okay. I just was wondering, where did the term justice education come from? What's the debate around that? Because I saw that as a topic of discussion.
Yeah. Well, if you're really fascinated by GAJE, if you go to organization and you go to history, and then you go to our archives, there's an article I actually wrote with the history, and it's got some things in it, and including in that is, this is the text of the talk that Menon gave in 1996 at the AALS conference. And inspired by that, the Working Party, which met in September of that year, was a working party meeting to establish an international council for the advancement of socially relevant legal education. We thought that was a little long. So, sort of during that, take a look at the minutes. During that, we kind of went back and forth and ended up coming up with the idea of justice education versus legal education as roughly equivalent to socially relevant legal education. And I have to say, the phrase has really appealed to people. When we did the initial conference in India, the most exciting speaker was Justice Krishna Iyer, who is really venerated. He was an enormously respected justice of the Indian Supreme Court, who did a great deal to kind of move that court into being responsive to the needs of the poor. And he just said, justice education, that's what we need in this country, not legal education. He actually said, no one should be allowed to become a judge who would not weep at the sight of injustice. How's that for a different idea? And then I went to a conference of clinical legal educators in China last August, and I was listening to the Chinese translations coming through, and they were saying justice education, justice education, justice education. We had Martine Bomer from Argentina at the working party meeting. We said, we want to make sure that GAJE isn't a rude word in Spanish. He said, no, GAJE. No, it's not rude. So, but what does it mean? It sounds nice. What does it mean? In a way, I guess that's the idea for the beginning of this conference, is to say, well, you know, it sounds like a nice phrase, but can we come up with an operational definition? And so our thought is going to be the first day, as people are going to be gathered into small groups. We usually have a warm-up to get to know other people deliberately, not from your part of the world. And I think what we're going to do is get you together and say, okay, right now, 2008, what does your country need from its lawyers? You know, just come up with a working list of what your country needs from its lawyers. And then say, okay, what should the process of producing lawyers be like to give your country the lawyers it needs? And we have a feeling that that process is going to give us the beginnings of an idea of what justice education might mean. And our idea really is we're going to have big, pieces of paper around the dining hall, and people are going to be writing up working definitions and talking about it during the week. And then when we have our convocation, our meeting, our membership meeting, we'll actually vote. Or it may be people say, you know what? It sounded like a good idea at the time. No, we can't come up with anything that has enough content that also isn't too culturally specific. So we may come up with we like the phrase, but it's got to mean something different in every country. But part of the idea of this is that people, particularly from, well, I think really even from the United States, but certainly people from other countries, say we would love to have a kind of model statement, kind of like you have a model code of criminal procedure or a model human rights statement, something that we could take to the regulatory authorities in our country, whether it's the Bar Council or the Department of Justice, and say, this organization has adopted this as a model statement of what the process should be for producing lawyers, that you should not, you should definitely have the minimum content. And attached to this model statement here are all the examples. This is how South Africa does it. This is how India does it. This is how Australia is moving toward it. This is what law schools in the United States are beginning to do. And that could be something that we could take to the ABA, or circulate on to the AALS, or for heaven's sakes talk to our local bar associations and so on. That process, in a way, is what led to what's going on at Pierce Law School. Is a committee that was chaired by a member of the New Hampshire Supreme Court, Justice Delaney, said, half of the people who become lawyers in New Hampshire go into solo practice. I was a trial judge for however many years. I just saw these people who just shouldn't have been licensed yet. We need a different process. And she, kind of working downward, kind of offered a carrot rather than a stick to Pierce Law School, which is, if you can come up with an alternative approach to produce client-ready lawyers, we won't make them take the bar exam. We'll license them when you produce them from that program. Now that's not happening all around the country, but that's an example that the Justice Education Initiative website would make available for other folks. John, do people need to get to someplace by 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, I better stop talking.
The next session's outside the door waiting for us.
Okay. Okay. Which I think is you guys, right? Is there a stack of flyers that?
Right here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.